whispering about snakes. I had a comment where someone asked for me to do multiple types of snakes, and then said maybe just to read about snakes in general. So I thought I'll start off by reading the snake Wikipedia, and then I shall move on and read the individual snake species, depending upon, of course, your recommendations. And so, if you have anything you would like me to read about, leave it in the comments below, or message me on any of my social media. I try to respond to every single comment that I can. I use the YouTube studio and check for the latest comments every day. So I hope you can leave me something and I'll be able to make a video for you. Without further ado, here is the whispering Wikipedia about the snake. Please remember that I cannot pronounce scientific terminology, nor do I know how to pronounce scientific name or family names. Okay, snakes are elongated, legless, carnivorous reptiles of the suborder Serpents or Serpentes. Not exactly sure. Like all other squamates, snakes are ectothermic amniote vertebrates covered in overlapping scales. Many species of snakes have skulls with several more joints than their lizard ancestors, enabling them to swallow prey much larger than their heads, with their highly mobile jaws. To accommodate their narrow bodies, snakes' paired organs, such as kidneys, appear one in front of the other instead of side by side. I did not know that. And most have only one functional lung. Some species retain a pelvic girdle with a pair of vestigial claws on either side of the cloaca. Interesting. Lizards have evolved elongated bodies without limbs, or with greatly reduced limbs, about 25 times independently via convergent evolution, leading to many lineages of legless lizards. Can you say that 5 times fast? Leading to many lineages of legless lizards, legless lizards. Legless lizards resemble snakes. They have eyelids and external ears, which snakes lack. Although this rule is not universal, if you see the Amphisphysbania, the Dibbaendia, and the Pygopodidae. Living snakes are found on every continent except Antarctica, and on most smaller land masses. Exceptions include some large islands such as Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, the Hawaiian archipelago, and the islands of New Zealand, and many small islands of the Atlantic and Central Pacific Oceans. Additionally, sea snakes are widespread throughout the Indian and Pacific Oceans. I actually caught a sea snake once when I was younger, and I was on a jetty, and luckily enough there was a marine biologist on that same jetty who managed to untangle it and set it free, which was very cool. More 6.95 meters, which is 22.8 feet in length. Dang. And the classic, the fossil species type Turnerboa Serengenesis was 12.8 meters, which is 42 feet long. Snakes are thought to have evolved from either burrowing or aquatic lizards, perhaps during the Jurassic period, with the earliest known fossils dating between 143 and 167 MA ago. The diversity of modern snakes appeared during the Paleocene epoch, which is 66 to 56 MA ago, after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event. The oldest preserved descriptions of snakes can be found in the Brooklyn Papyrus. Most species are non-venomous, and those that have venom use it primarily to kill and subdue prey, rather than for self-defense. Some possess venom potent enough to cause painful injury or death to humans. Non-venomous snakes either swallow prey alive or kill by constriction, which is basically non-friendly hugs. The etymology. The English word snake comes from Old English snacker, itself from Proto-Germanic snakan, from Germanic schnack, ring snake, Swedish snock, grass snake, from Proto-Indo-European root sneko, to crawl, to creep, which also gave sneak, as well as the Sanskrit naga, meaning snake. And if you have played Warcraft, you know that these slithering lizard creatures are called the naga. The word ousted adder, as adder went on to narrow in meaning, though in Old English nedra was the general word for snake. The other term, serpent, is from French, ultimately from Indo-European serp, to creep, which also gave ancient Greek herpo, I crawl. Onto the evolution of snakes. The fossil record of snakes is relatively poor, because snake skeletons are typically small and fragile, making fossilization uncommon. Fossils readily identifiable as snakes, though often retaining hind limbs, first appear in the fossil record during the Cretaceous period. The earliest known true snake fossil, members of the crown group serpents, come from the marine Cymolophids, the oldest of which is the late Cretaceous Cenomanian age, Haseophysis terrasanctus, dated between 112 and 94 million years old. Based on comparative anatomy, there is a consensus that snakes descend from lizards, as horny projections when visible. Front limbs are non-existent in all known snakes. This is caused by the evolution of their HOX genes controlling limb morphogenesis. If you want to see some really freaky stuff, search HOX genes on Google Images. Maybe search weird or HOX gene mutations and you'll find some interesting stuff. I know that when we studied it in high school and university, there were some interesting mutations there. The axial skeleton of the snake's common ancestor, like most other tetrapods, had regional specializations consisting of cervical, neck, thoracic, chest, and lumbar lower back, and sacral, pelvic, and caudal tail vertebrae. Same names in describing the human anatomy. Early in snake evolution, the HOX gene expression in the axial skeleton responsible for the development of the thoracic became dominant. As a result, the vertebrae anterior to the hind limb buds, when present, all have the same thoracic-like identity, except from the atlas axis and 1 to 3 neck vertebra. In other words, most of a snake's skeleton is an extremely extended thorax. Ribs are found exclusively on the thoracic vertebrae. Neck, lumbar, and pelvic vertebrae are very reduced in number. Only 2 to 10 lumbar and pelvic vertebrae are present, while only a short tail remains of the caudal vertebra. However, the tail is still long enough to be of important use in many species, and is modified in some aquatic and tree-dwelling species. Many modern snake groups originated during the Paleocene, alongside the adaptive radiation of mammals following the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs. The expansion of grasslands in North America also led to an explosive radiation among snakes. Previously, snakes were a minor component of the North American fauna, but during the Miocene, the number of species and their prevalence increased dramatically with the first appearances of vipers and elapids in North America, and the significant diversification of Colubridae, including the origin of many modern genera such as Nerodia, Lampropodilis, Pituphis, and Pantherophis. On to origins. There is fossil evidence to suggest that snakes may have evolved from burrowing lizards, such as the varanids, or a similar group during the Cretaceous period. An early fossil snake relative, Najash rhinocrina, was a two-legged burrowing animal with a sacrum and was fully terrestrial. One extant analogue of these putative ancestors in their earless monitor Lanthanidas of Borneo, though it also is semi-aquatic. Subterranean species evolved bodies streamlined for burrowing and eventually lost their limbs. According to this hypothesis, features such as the transparent fused eyelids, the brille, and a loss of external ears evolved to cope with fossorial difficulties such as scratched corneas and dirt in the ears. Some primitive snakes are known to have possessed hind limbs, but their pelvic bones lacked a direct connection to the vertebra. These include fossil species like Hasiophysis, Pachyrachius, and Eubiphosaurus, which are slightly older than Najash. This hypothesis was strengthened in 2015 by the discovery of a 113 million year old fossil of a four-legged snake in Brazil that has been named Tetrapodus amplictus. It has many snake-like features, is adapted for burrowing, and its stomach indicates that it was preying on other animals. It is currently uncertain if Tetrapodus is a snake or another species in the squamate order, as a snake-like body has independently evolved at least 26 times. Tetrapodus does not have distinctive snake features in its spine and skull. An alternative hypothesis based on morphology suggests the ancestors of snakes were related to mosasaurs, extinct aquatic reptiles from the Cretaceous, which in turn are thought to have derived from varanid lizards. According to this hypothesis, the fused, transparent eyelids of snakes are thought to have evolved to combat marine conditions, corneal water loss through osmosis, and the external ears were lost through disuse in an aquatic environment. This ultimately led to an animal similar to today's sea snakes. In the late Cretaceous, snakes recolonized land and continued to diversify into today's snakes. Fossilized snake remains are known from early late Cretaceous marine sediments, which is consistent with this hypothesis, particularly so as they are older than the terrestrial Najash Rhyogonina. Similar skull structure, reduced or absent limbs, and other anatomical features found in both mosasaurs and snakes lead to a positive cladistical correlation, although some of these features are shared with varanids. Genetic studies in recent years have indicated snakes are not as closely related to monitor lizards as was once believed, and therefore not to mosasaurs, the proposed ancestor in the aquatic scenario of their evolution. However, more evidence links mosasaurs to snakes than to varanids. Fragmented remains found from the Jurassic and early Cretaceous indicate deeper fossil records for these groups, which may potentially refute either hypothesis. In 2016, 2 studies reported that limb loss in snakes is associated with DNA mutations in the zone of polarizing activity regulatory sequence, ZRS, a regulatory region of the sonic hedgehog gene, which is critically required for limb development. Wow. So there is a gene called the sonic hedgehog gene. Interesting. More advanced snakes have no remnants of limbs, but basal snakes such as pythons and boas do have traces of highly reduced vestigial hind limbs. Python embryos even have fully developed hind limb buds, but their later development is stopped by the DNA mutations in the ZRS. Moving to the distribution. There are over 2,900 species of snakes ranging as far northward as the Arctic Circle in Scandinavia and southward through Australia. Snake 16,000 feet, which is 4,900 meters, in the Himalayan mountains of Asia. There are numerous islands from which snakes are absent, such as Ireland, Iceland, and New Zealand. Although New Zealand's waters are infrequently visited by the yellow-bellied snake and the branded sea crate. Moving again to the taxonomy. All modern snakes are grouped with the suborder Serpens in Linnean taxonomy, part of the order Squamata. Through their precise placement within squamates remains controversial. The two infra-orders of Serpens are Elithiniophidia and Scoliconfida. This separation is based on morphological characteristics and mitochondrial DNA sequence similarity. If you don't know what mitochondrial DNA, you have your own cells, and then of course you have that saying the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and the microchondria is actually a separate organism which lives inside of your cells, helping you to produce something called ATP, adenine triphosphate, which gives you energy basically. But the mitochondria early on in our evolution was actually a separate animal which began to work together with our cell and then found a home living in it. And the unique thing about it is your mother gives you the mitochondria, not your father. Unlike your DNA, it's actually a completely separate set of DNA. It's not human DNA, but you can find it in your cells, in your mitochondria, and track up your mother's line, so it's very useful for DNA sequencing and tracking. Elithiniophidia is sometimes split into Heniophidia and Caniophidia, with the latter consisting of colubrid snakes, colubrids, vipers, elapids, hydrophids, and attractophids, and cocordids, while the other Eliphidian families comprised Heniophidia. While not extant today, the Metasidae, a family of giant primitive python-like snakes, was around until 50,000 years ago in Australia by genera such as Wanumbi. There are numerous debates in the systematics within the group. For instance, many sources classify Bodidae and Pythonidae as one family, while some keep the Elapidae and Hydrophidae, the sea snakes Hydro, separate for practical reasons despite their extremely close relation. Recent molecular studies support the morphology of the clades of modern snakes, Scolicophidians, Typholipids, Anopoliphids, Elithiniophidians, core Elithiniophidians, Europtilids, Macrostomatodons, Boids, and then Boids with one O, Pythonids, and Canophidians. Interesting. And legless lizards. While snakes are limbless reptiles which evolved from and grouped with lizards, there are many other species of lizard which have lost their limbs independently and superficially look similar to snakes. These include the slowworm and glass snake. Other serpentine tetrapods unrelated to snakes include the caecilians, the amphibians, the amphibicebians, the near lizard squamates. Now we move to the biology of the snake. The now extinct Titanoboa Serengenesis snakes were 12.8 meters, which is 42 feet in length. By comparison, the largest extant snakes, extant is the opposite of extinct, are the reticulated python, which measures about 6.95 meters, which is 22.8 feet long, and the green photoreceptors in deep grooves on the snout, which allow them to see the radiated heat of warm-blooded prey. In pit vipers, the grooves are located between the nostril and the eye in a large pit on each side of the head. Other infrared sensitive snakes have multiple smaller labial pits lining the upper lip, just below the nostrils. Snakes use smell to track their prey. They smell by using their forked tongues to collect airborne particles, just passing them to the voronasal organ or Jacobson's organ in the mouth for examination. The fork in the tongue gives snakes a sort of directional sense of smell and taste simultaneously. They keep their tongues constantly in motion, sampling particles from the air, ground, and water, analyzing the chemicals found, and determining the presence of prey or predators in the local environment. In water-dwelling snakes such as the anaconda, the tongue functions efficiently underwater. Wow, interesting. The underside is very sensitive to vibration. This allows snakes to be able to sense approaching animals by detecting faint vibrations in the ground. Epic. Snake vision varies greatly, from only being able to distinguish light from dark to keen eyesight, but the main trend is that their vision is adequate, although not sharp, and allows them to track movements. Generally, vision is best in arboreal snakes and weakest in burrowing snakes. Some snakes, such as the Asian vine snake in the genus Etymology, have binocular vision, with both eyes capable of focusing on the same point. Interesting. Most snakes focus by moving the lens back and forth in relation to the retina, while in the other amniote groups the lens is stretched. Many nocturnal snakes have slit pupils, while diurnal snakes have round pupils. Most species possess 3 visual pigments and are probably able to see 2 primary colours in daylight. It's concluded that the last common ancestors of all snakes had UV-sensitive vision, but that most snakes that depends on their eyesight to hunt in daylight have evolved lenses that act as sunglasses which filter out UV light, and probably also sharpens their vision by improving the contrasts, similar to what we have in our eyes. Onto skin. The skin of a snake is covered in scales, contrary to the popular notion of snakes being slimy because of their possible confusion of snakes with worms. Snake skin has a smooth and dry texture. Most snakes use specialized belly scales to travel gripping surfaces. The body scales may be smoothed, keeled, or granular. The eyelids of a snake are transparent, spectacle scales which remain permanently closed, also known as brill. The shedding of scales is called escapism, or in normal usage, molting or sloughing. In the case of snakes, the complete outer layer of skin is shed in one layer. Snake scales are not discrete, but extensions of the epidermis. Hence, they are not shed separately, but as a complete outer layer during each molt, akin to a sock being turned inside out. gross, that metaphor, but I understand what they're going for. Snakes have a wide diversity of skin coloration patterns. These patterns are often related to behavior, such as a tendency to flee from predators. Snakes that are plain or have longitudinal stripes often have to escape from predators, with the pattern or lack thereof not providing reference points to predators, thus allowing the snake to escape without being noticed. Plain snakes usually adopt active hunting strategies, as their pattern allows them to send little information to prey about motion. Blotched snakes, on the other hand, usually use ambush-based strategies, likely because it helps them blend into an environment with irregularly shaped objects like sticks or rocks. Spotted patterning can similarly help snakes to blend into their environment. The shape and number of scales in the head, back, and belly are often characteristic and used for taxonomic purposes. Scales are named mainly according to their positions on the body. In advanced Caniophidian scales snakes, the broad belly scales and rows of dorsal scales correspond to the vertebra, allowing scientists to count the vertebrae without dissection. Interesting. And now onto molting. Molting, or asceticis, serves a number of functions. Firstly, the old and worn skin is replaced. Secondly, it helps get rid of parasites such as mites and ticks. Renewal of the skin by molting is supposed to allow growth in some animals, such as insects. However, this has been disputed in the case of snakes. Molting occurs periodically throughout the snake's life. Before a molt, the snake stops eating and often hides or moves to a safe place. Just before shedding, the skin becomes dull and dry-looking, and the eyes become cloudy or blue-coloured. The inner surface of the old skin liquefies. This causes the old skin to separate from the new skin beneath it. After a few days, the eyes clear, and the snake crawls out of its old skin. The old skin breaks near the mouth, and the snake wriggles out, aided by rubbing against rough surfaces. In many cases, the cast skin peels backward over the body, from head to tail in one piece, like pulling a sock off inside out. Ew. A new, larger, brighter layer of skin has formed underneath. An older snake may shed its skin only once or twice a year, but a younger snake still growing may shed up to 4 times a year. The discarded skin gives a perfect imprint of the scale pattern, and it's usually possible to identify the snake if the discarded skin is reasonably intact. This periodic renewal has led to the snake being a symbol of healing and medicine, as pictured in the rod of Asclepius. Scale counts can sometimes be used to tell the sex of a snake when the species is not distinctly sexually dimorphic. Sexual dimorphism is the biological difference between a male and female in a species. A probe is inserted into the cloaca until it can go no further. The probe is marked at the point where it stops, removed, and compared to the is a male or female, as hemipenes of a male will probe to a different length, usually longer than the cloaca of a female. Onto the skeleton. The skeleton of most snakes consists solely of the skull, hyoid, vertebral column, and ribs, though Haenophidian snakes retain vestiges of the pelvis and rear limbs. The skull of the snake consists of a solid and complete neocranium, to which many of the other bones are only loosely attached, particularly the highly mobile jaw bones, which facilitate manipulation and ingestion of the large prey items. The left and right sides of the lower jaw are joined only by a flexible ligament at the anterior tips, allowing them to separate widely, while the posterior end of the lower jaw bones articulate with a quadrate bone, allowing further mobility. The bones of the mandible and quadrate bones can also pick up ground-borne vibrations. Because the sides of the jaw can move independently of one another, snakes resting their jaws on a surface have sensitive stereo hearing, which can detect the position of prey. The jaw quadrate states a pathway is capable of detecting vibrations on the angiostrom scale, despite the absence of an outer ear and the ossicle mechanism of impedance matching used in other vertebrates to receive vibrations from the air. The hyoid is a small bone located posterior and ventral to the skull in the neck region. Same for humans. That's the one that breaks if someone is strangled to death, which serves as an attachment for muscles of the snake's tongue, as it does in all other tetrapods. The vertebral column consists of anywhere between 200 and 400 or more vertebrae. Tail vertebrae are comparatively few in numbers, often less than 20% of the total, and lack ribs, while body vertebrae each have 2 ribs articulating with them. The vertebrae have projections that allow for strong muscle attachment, enabling locomotion without limbs. Autonomy of the tail, a feature found in some lizards, is absent in most snakes. Caudal autonomy in snakes is rare and is intervertebral. Caudal means the head towards the head, unlike that in lizards, which is intervertebral, that is, the break happens along a predefined fracture plane present on a vertebra. In some snakes, most notably boas and pythons, there are vestiges of the hind limbs in the form of a pair of pelvic spurs. These small claw-like protrusions on each side of the cloaca are the external portion of the vestigial hind limb skeleton, which includes the remains of an ilium and femur. Snakes and other reptiles have a 3-chambered heart that controls the circulatory system via the left and right atrium and 1 ventricle. Internally, the ventricle is divided into 3 interconnected cavities, which include the cavum aretosium, the cavum pulmonale, and the cavum venosum. The cavum venosum receives deoxygenated blood from the right atrium, while the cavum arteriosum receives oxygen The snake's heart is encased in a sac called the pericardium, located at the bifurcation of the bronchi. The heart is able to move around, however, owing to the lack of a diaphragm. This adjustment protects the heart from potential damage when large ingested prey is passed through the esophagus. The spleen is attached to the gallbladder and pancreas and filters the blood. The thymus is located in fatty tissue above the heart and is responsible for the generation of immune cells in the blood. The cardiovascular system of snakes is also unique for the presence of a renal portal system in which the blood from snakes' tails pass through the kidneys before returning to the heart. Interesting, so it goes down and then up back the tail, kind of like a xylem and a phloem in plants. The vestigial left lung is often small, or sometimes even absent, as snakes' tubular bodies require all their organs to be long and thin. In the majority of species, only one lung is functional. The lung contains a vascularized anterior portion and a posterior portion that does not function in gas exchange. This saccular lung is used for hydrostatic purposes to adjust buoyancy in some aquatic snakes, and its function remains unknown. Many organs that are paired, such as kidneys or reproductive organs, are staggered within the body, with one located ahead of the other, and snakes have no lymph nodes. Interesting, I wonder how they fight infectious disease then. Onto venom. Cobras, vipers, and closely related species use venom to immobilize, injure, or kill their prey. The venom is modified saliva, delivered through fangs. The fangs of advanced venomous snakes like viperids and elapids are hollow to inject venom more effectively, while the fangs of rear-fanged snakes such as the boomslang merely have a groove on the posterior edge to channel venom into the wound. Snake venoms are often prey-specific. Their role in self-defense is secondary. Interesting. Venom, like all salivary secretions, is a predigestant that initiates the breakdown of food into soluble compounds, facilitating proper digestion. Even non-venomous snake bites, like any animal bite, will cause tissue damage. Interesting. Certain birds, mammals, and other snakes, such as king snakes, that prey on venomous snakes have developed resistance and even immunity to certain venoms. Venomous snakes include 3 families of snakes that do not constitute a formal classification group used in taxonomy. The colloquial term poisonous snake is generally an incorrect label for snakes. A poison is inhaled or ingested, whereas venom produced by snakes is injected into its victim via fangs. There are, however, 2 exceptions. The Rhabdophthis sequesters toxins from the toad eats, then secretes them from nuchal glands to ward off predators, and a small unusual population of garter snakes in the US state of Oregon retains enough toxins in their livers from the newts they eat to be effectively poisonous to small local predators such as crows and foxes. Okay, dear friends, I think I'm going to split this video now. I'm going to keep recording